Section 9 of Crime, Its Causes and Remedies by Cesare Lombroso. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recorded by Leon Harvey. Chapter 9. Influence of Economic Conditions. Wealth. Subchapter 54. The influence of wealth is a factor much more disputed than that of education, and the most impartial examination of the facts fails to give a complete solution, for the investigator fails to secure a sufficient number of decisive proofs. Bodio himself, in his classic work, De alcuni indici numeratori del movimento economico in Italia, 1890, shows that it is impossible to give an answer to the question, what is the actual wealth of Italy? It is impossible to place a valuation upon all the agricultural mineral wealth, because we have no exact statistics of mining and agriculture. A statement of all individual properties is possible for lack of a stimulus appraisal of all real and personal property. It is necessary, therefore, to rely upon private statements as found deeds of gift and wills. The average wage must be arrived at hypothetically upon the basis of the minimum necessary for living, which itself, in turn, is based upon conjectural data. To estimate wealth on the basis of taxes alone is seen plainly to be impossible when one reflects that the errors of the assessors by themselves will be sufficient to overthrow all calculations, without considering the numbers of businessmen and bankers, and even professional men who escape taxation more or less completely. This is why the results in this division of the subject, however one may attack it, hardly succeeded in establishing an exact relation between wealth and the more important crimes. Subchapter 55. Taxes. The following tables present a comparison of the number of the principal crimes compared with the sum total of all taxes paid by the inhabitants of the various provinces, including taxes upon consumption, internal revenue, tobacco, salt, etc., direct taxes, farm property, real estate generally, personal property, etc., and taxes upon business. A table is displayed on the page titled Maximum Wealth, with 6 columns. Averaging tax paid in capital in francs, province, sexual crimes, frauds, thefts, homicides. An additional table, mean wealth, with taxes, province, sexual crimes, frauds, thefts, and homicides. Same comparison on a second table with mean wealth, and a third, minimum wealth. The next table is formed by arranging these figures in groups, and adding to them the data for the years 1890 to 93, furnished by Bodio, in which he includes, besides the thefts tried at the Assize, those coming before the minor courts. A table is displayed with fraud, sexual crimes, thefts, and homicides compared with wealth in 1885 to 86 and wealth 1890 to 93, split between 3 columns, maximum, mean, and minimum. On which it appears that fraudulent crimes increase positively with the increase of wealth, and the same is true of thefts, but if we add rural thefts we get the maximum where wealth is least. And this last is always true of homicides. This more shows clearly the influence of mere poverty upon the minor crimes. We have already shown in the chapter on subsistence that in Germany, while thefts in general became less frequent in the years when the price of grain was lowest, and increased when the price was very high, thefts from the forests, on the other hand, pursued the contrary course. But these thefts, which still recall the ancient time when land and pasture were common property, are bound up with old tradition, and only exceptionally represent the immorality of the country. The results for sexual crimes are more unexpected. They show the minimum in Italy, where wealth is moderate, and the maximum where there is the minimum of wealth. Italy thus presents an exception, as the usual course of sexual crimes is to increase with the increase of wealth. An examination of the figures shows likewise that there are individual provinces which give figures very far from the average of their several groups. Subchapter 56. Inheritance Taxes. De Fauville believes that it is possible to estimate private wealth upon the basis of the declarations and wills, but if we study Pantaleone's very valuable statistics for Italy, we shall see with what difficulty we shall arrive at any idea of the relation of crime to wealth. In fact, in studying the table given on the following page, we draw the conclusion that the richest districts, Piedmont, Liguria, Lombardy, and Tuscany, have a proportion of crimes against property less than the average of the kingdom. The same is true of the districts which in wealth come nearest in the average, Venice and Emilia. The poorest regions, Sardinia, Sicily, and Naples, have a high criminality, but Umbria and the Marches, which are also poor, show a very low figure for crime. Thefts are very rare in Tuscany, Lombardy, Emilia, Piedmont, and Liguria, which are the richest districts, and also in one of the poorest, the Marches. In Sicily, they are moderately numerous, and in Venice a little more so, a fact to be explained by the intense misery of the agricultural population of the latter district. The richest district, Latium, and the poorest, Sardinia, have the greatest number of thefts, so that here there is no equivalent parallelism with wealth. Bodio observes that in the case of Latium it is necessary to take account of the disturbing influence of the capital upon both crime and wealth. The inheritance taxes are in this case an unreliable measure of the wealth of the locality, since there is capital concentrated here which belongs to other districts. Besides this, there is at Rome, on account of special conditions of rural property and the system of cultivation and use, a very limited number of persons who have immense properties, a fact which has a disproportionate effect upon the inheritance taxes. The smallest number of frauds is found in Umbria and the Marches. Then come Tuscany, Emilia, Venice, Piedmont, Liguria, and Lombardy, which are the richer districts. The districts of Naples furnish fewer frauds by a great deal than it would seem it should because of its comparative poverty. A table is displayed on the page titled Indictments, average to 100,000 population, 1887-89. These list Latium, Piedmont, Liguria, Lombardy, Tuscany, Venice, Reggio, Emilia, Sicily, Naples, Marches, Umbria, and Sardinia, compared with average wealth, thefts, frauds, highway robberies, homicides, and assaults. The minimum number of highway robberies is shown by Venice and Lombardy, rich, and by Umbria and the Marches, poor. The medium number by Tuscany, Emilia, Naples, Piedmont, and Liguria. Sardinia and Sicily, which are poor, are joined with the wealthy district of Latium in giving the maximum. The great contradictions are very apparent. Subchapter 57. Lack of employment. One would be tempted to believe at once that unemployment must exercise a perceptible influence upon criminality. It is, however, of little importance. In New South Wales, the effect of periods of idleness upon the workmen is also nothing. Wright maintains that at the same time of industrial depressions, all crimes are increased, but he presents no proof. When he says that of 220 convicts in Massachusetts, 147 were with regular work, and that 68% of criminals have no occupation, he only bears witness that criminals do not like to work, a fact that is very well known. In the United States, 82% of the murderers about whom the facts were ascertainable were occupied when they committed their crime, and only 18% were without work. It seems then that unemployment is not a cause of crimes or violence. The fact that the majority of criminals have almost never a settled trade does not contradict this. They never had an occupation and never wanted to have one, while the real unemployed are those who have had work and lost it through circumstances beyond their control, or practically so, allowing for strikes. Subchapter 58. Days of work. A surer criterion for this question is to be found in the number of days' wages equivalent to the annual price of food for one individual. See table. Footnote 5. This approaches closely to the study which we have already made of the cost of subsistence. A table is displayed on the previous page, comparing days of work equivalent to a year's food in England and Wales, Scotland, Ireland, Belgium, France, Germany, Austria, Italy, and Spain, and compared to the number of persons to the 100,000 inhabitants convicted for homicide, assault, several offences, and theft. We see here, 1. That excessive labour in connection with the minimum wage, that is to say, with a lack of proper nourishment, has a certain correspondence with homicide. In fact, Scotland, England, and Ireland, which have the minimum number of days' work, have also the minimum of homicides, 0.51, 0.56, 1.05, and Spain and Italy, which had the maximum of homicides, 8.25, 9.53. 2. Further, there is a certain correspondence in the case of assaults. England, Ireland, and Scotland, which have the minimum necessary days of work, 127, have also the minimum number of assaults, 2.67, 6.24, 11.59. Austria and Italy have a maximum number of days of work, 152 and 163, with the maximum assaults likewise 155 to 130. But there is at the same time an exception in the case of Spain, which has a small number of assaults, with a large number of days, and also in the case of Belgium, which shows a large number of assaults, 175.34, with only 136 days of work. A fact solely to be traced to the influence of alcoholism. The influence is reversed in the case of sexual offences. Of these, one frequently observes the lower numbers where the number of days' work required is highest. Thus, Spain, where 154 days are required, has but 1.03 sexual crimes, while Belgium, which is next to the smallest number of days of work, 130, has next to the highest number of these offences. The United Kingdom, however, which shows the minimum number of days, has the second lowest number of sexual crimes, 4. The number of thefts is apparently in no way affected, for we see all degrees of this crime in countries with both high and low figures as the days of work, as in Spain, Belgium, France, Italy, etc. Subchapter 59. Savings Banks. I have thought that the number of the depositors in the savings banks would give more reliable data for the real wealth of a country, because this would give the measure of the principal source of wealth, foresight and economy, and hence measure how prevalent among the people are the forces that inhabit violence and crime. As a matter of fact, we have already seen that in France, wealth is in direct relation to the lower birth rate, which at bottom corresponds to greater foresight and to greater inhibitive power. According to Coghlan, opposite, we find in Europe, the table is displayed on the page, comparing Switzerland, Denmark, Sweden, England, Prussia, France, Austria, and Italy to Person Street Savings Bank Book, and crimes to 100,000 inhabitants, homicide and theft. These figures show how homicides decrease as the number of bank books increases, while the contrary is true of thefts. In Italy it is true, from the very limited data that we have. We see the greatest number of savings bank books, while corresponding, as elsewhere, with the smallest number of homicides, corresponds also with the smallest number of thefts. The average of the different crimes in the 20 Italian provinces that have the greatest number of savings bank books, 1, 2, from 3 to 6 inhabitants, in the 20 with the smallest number, 1, 2, from 15 to 24, and in the 20 that we have a medium number, 1, 2, from 8 to 13, is as follows. The average number of crimes in 20 provinces in which number of books is, a table displayed on the page, listing fraudulent crimes, sexual crimes, thefts and homicides, graded maximum, intermediate and minimum. As we have seen in the case of taxes in Italy, so it is here, and there is less foresight in saving, as evidenced by the number of savings bank books. There are more crimes of blood, thefts and rapes, but less swindling. While these relations are just reversed for the maximum and moderate degrees of wealth, this simply means that a country still barbarous is more inclined to violence than to cunning. But the same peculiarity with regard to Italy that we noted in connection with the taxes is again apparent here, namely that rapes, which elsewhere increase with wealth, here are most common in the poorest provinces. However, where race and climate already impel to evil, wealth, as I have already said, can do nothing. Thus we find a high number of homicides in the richest provinces like Palermo with 42, Rome with 27, Naples with 26, and Leghorn with 21. These apparent exceptions are explained by the geographical position of Palermo and Naples, by race at Leghorn, and in Rome by race, abuse of alcohol, and political conditions. The contrary is true of the poorer provinces, which geographical position, climate, and race exaggerate the influence of poverty. For the highest figures are to be found in the southern and insular provinces. In the case of sexual crimes also, there are analogous exceptions and explanations, since a large number are to be found in the rich provinces of Leghorn, 26, and Rome, 22, while among the poor provinces, a very small number is shown by Reggio, Emilia, Vicenza, 4, Bolino and Rovigo, 5, Udine, 7, etc. Here again the explanation is evidently ethnic and geographic. This proves indirectly that the high figures shown by the poorer provinces in southern Italy and the islands are connected not with economic peculiarities, but with race and climate. Subchapter 60. Savings in France. As regards France, by estimating the wealth in the several departments on the basis of the number of savings bank books to 1,000 inhabitants, we find that crimes invariably increase directly as wealth increases. Thus, departments where the degree of wealth is A table is displayed on the page, with average number of homicides, thefts, rapes compared to minimum, medium, and maximum. The striking difference of the influence of savings in France and in Italy is explained, up to a certain point, in the same way that we have explained the difference that we have found between the two countries in the influence of density, see Chapter 5. Namely, that it is to the richest districts of France, when manufacturing is most developed, that the emigrants flow, and these commit, in general, 4 times as many crimes as the French. Now, from 1851 to 1886, the number of immigrants into France tripled, and the quality of the immigrants deteriorated as their numbers increased. From the beginning, it is the better elements that come in. But later, when the current that carries men from one country to another becomes too strong, it carries the worst elements with it, surely. The departments of Nord has 4 times more foreigners than Bouches-du-Rhône, and 19 times more than Hérault, but it has 9 times more naturalizations than the former, and 75 times more than the latter. That is to say, the foreign element in Nord is much more stable and assimilable, being largely Belgian, while Hérault is much frequented by Spaniards. Immigrants are also drawn into France by the low birth rate and by the frequency of strikes, which give them hope of finding work. In southern Italy, climatic and ethnic factors come into collision with the economic factor. We have already seen that in consequence of the joint effort of the Semitic element in the population and the hot climate, all crimes against persons, and in part those against property, are abnormally increased. But it would be a great mistake to suppose that the explanations are sufficient. We have still to look for a graver cause. If we compare certain districts of Italy, like Piedmont and Lombardy, with parts of France that are similar in race and climate, we shall see that under nearly identical conditions opposite phenomena occur. In Italy, the greater savings correspond with the smaller number of crimes, while in France the contrary happens. Here we must see the cause in the fact that in France the maximum wealth is enormously greater than in Italy, at least 4 times as great in fact. This is the more important, since in many places in France this wealth, being too quickly acquired, drives its possessors to the greatest debauchery, so that, as Jolly well puts it, to amuse oneself and to debauch oneself become synonymous. We find direct proof of this in the fact that in Italy, moderate and maximum wealth both lead to the same results, just because there is so much resemblance between them, while in France, on the contrary, the maximum degree of wealth differs enormously from moderate means, and in consequence produces contrary results. In Italy, the increase of savings is an effect of economy rather than of positive wealth, while in France, at least in the manufacturing districts, especially Hérault and Bouches-du-Rhône, savings accounts are an indication of a wealth so great that it too often degenerates into an occasion of a wild speculation. Hence it is that we find all the advantages of wealth in one country and all the disadvantages in the other. Moderate wealth slowly accumulated restrains from crime. Inordinate wealth is no longer a rein, but a spur and an incentive to crime. Subchapter 61. Agriculture and Manufacturing. In fact, when manufacturing crowds agriculture hard, and still more it displaces it entirely, we see the number of crimes increased immediately. Indeed, if we divide France, as in the study sur la criminality pendant 50 ans above, into agricultural, mixed, and manufacturing districts, we see that crime nearly always increases as we pass from the first name to the last. Of 52 agricultural departments, only 11 or 26% go beyond the average number of assassinations in France, while the average is exceeded by 10 out of the 26 departments of mixed industry, or 38%, and by 7 out of 17 manufacturing departments, or 41%. Rapes upon adults and crimes against persons show us similar results. Percentage of departments exceeding the average of all France. In a table displayed on the page, comparing agricultural departments, 42, mixed, 26, manufacturing, 17, to rapes and crimes against persons. These figures are certainly to be explained by aggregations of population and the coming of immigrants. In the departments of Hérault, writes Joly, fraud came in permanently with wealth. Never were there more attempts at bribery, whether of the local officials or of the highest representatives of the central administration. A case has been cited to me in which the entire municipal council fraudulently evaded the payment of their own taxes. This evil was the greater for going unpunished, the jury having brought in the acquittal. Was not this general demoralization produced, or hastened, and aggravated in any case, by the crisis of wine growing, which has permitted these people since 1874 to make enormous gains with the wines? As a matter of fact, it was in 1874 that Herald passed from the 5th place as regards criminality up to the 61st, in 1884, and went up to the 81st. From that day, writes Jolly again, when the peasants, hitherto poor, could change their uncultivated land into vineyards, and from the day when, thanks to the railroads, their products increased enormously in value before their eyes, from that day they became greedy. The man who has gambled and won in the stock exchange dreams only of stocks and bonds, and of cornering the market. Now all wealth gained without effort resembles a little money won by gambling, and has the same effect upon the mind. It is good fortune, says the Commissioner of Sixth, that has ruined this country. When Bocage was poor it was honest. Now those who steal have positions themselves, and the well-to-do peasants commit more crimes than the vagrants. Jolly. In the East, in the departments of Eure, and the West, in Calvados, manufacturing and agriculture are backward, and there is little criminality. In Vere the inhabitants live by working the ground, and crime is almost unknown. Subchapter 62. Wealth as a cause of crime. Those consequently who affirm that criminality is always an effect of poverty have not considered the other side of the question, and observed the case where crime is the effect of wealth. Rapidly acquired wealth which is not balanced by a higher character or by a lofty religious or political idealism is harmful rather than helpful. Spencer also has said of wealth that accommodating as the fundamental character of a people is good or bad, it leads to virtue or vice, and especially is the latter the effect of excessive wealth, which, like excessive power or excessive education, is a natural instrument of despotism, of all sorts of sexual and alcoholic abuses, and a consequence of crime. Accordingly, wealth is now a check, now a spur to crime, just as we have seen is the case with education, civilization, and density of population, and as we shall see to be true of religion. Here is a criterion which must especially be kept in mind in the etiology of crime, for according to our character and stage of development, the same cause now destroys, now saves us. Thus we shall see apparent contradictions disappear, even contribute towards a full explanation. Thus the United States, those states which have the highest criminality, have now the maximum, now the minimum of wealth, as shown by the data obtained directly from individuals in taking the census. We see there that the richest states have a low criminality. Rhode Island, for example, $183 per capita, has a criminal figure of 0.11. Massachusetts, with nearly the same degree of wealth, $178, has nearly twice the criminality, 0.2. Almost the same as the District of Columbia, 0.21, which is a moderate degree of wealth, $112, and has also Wyoming, which, however, shows nearly twice the criminality, 0.35. Some poor states like Dakota, $30 per capita, Alabama, $19, and New Mexico, $19, give the lowest criminal statistics, from 0.04 to 0.03. But here we counter a contradiction, for Delaware, with a criminality figure of only 0.05, has a moderate amount of wealth, $82. We have seen above how in France and Italy criminality in general increases, only changing its character. We have seen that Altera furnishes the maximum of crime for Italy, and yet there is no one, according to Zegil, is really poor, all being small landholders, etc. This does not prevent the fact that when a state of barbarism prevails, as in Corsica, crimes against persons increase, as simple thefts do, in the years and districts in which there is extreme poverty. Subchapter 63. Explanation. The cause of all this is only too clear. On the one side, poverty and the lack of absolute necessities impel toward the theft of indispensable things for the satisfaction of the individual's own needs. This is the first cord binding poverty and assaults upon poverty. On the other hand, poverty makes men impulsive through the cortical irritation following the abuse of wine and alcohol. That terrible poison to which so many of the poor resort is still the pangs of hunger. Account must be taken also of the degeneration produced by scurvy, scrofula, anemia, and alcoholism in the parents, which often transforms itself into epilepsy and moral insanity. Poverty also drives men to commit brutal eliminations of individuals who are an unwelcome burden upon the family, recalling the parricides and infanticides committed by savages under similar circumstances. Poverty is indirectly a cause of sexual crimes on account of the difficulty which the poor have of obtaining satisfaction through prostitution, on account of precocious promiscuity in factories and mines, and also because of the frequency of infantilism or feminism among the boys. On the other hand, when a slight temptation toward evil is presented to an individual in comfortable circumstances, he is rendered physically and morally stronger by sufficient nutrition and a sounder moral training, and is thus pressed by need, so that while he feels the impulsion to do evil, he can more easily resist it. But wealth, in its turn, is a source of degeneration from other causes, such as syphilis, exhaustion, etc. It drives men to crime through vanity, in order to surpass others, and from a fatal ambition to cut a figure in the world, which, as we have seen, is one of the greatest causes of crimes against property. Also, as Cesare has very truly remarked, where wealth is absolutely the greatest, it is always accumulated in the hands of a few, so that, at the same time, there is always great poverty, more keenly felt because of the contrast. This favours a tendency towards crime on the one hand, and on the other furnishes better opportunities for it. Besides, it should be noted that where wealth is least, the crowding in of population is least, especially of dangerous individuals who gather in the richer districts to carry on their criminal practices more easily, as for example in France at Sète. If it is true, on the other hand, that urgent need drives the poor to wrongdoing, it is only to a very limited number of crimes, although these are more violent ones, while the artificial wants of the rich, although less urgent, are more numerous, and the kinds of crime among them are infinitely more numerous also, as well as the means of escaping punishment encouraged by the example of persons high in politics. This we see in Italy, ministers guilty of crimes against the public who remain in power in spite of the discovery of their crime, and even use it as a means of fortifying their position. It is only in France and England that the people refuse to be governed by criminals. As for sexual and alcoholic crimes, the first satisfaction made possible by wealth never sufficiently appeases the blessed, but drives them on to seek new excitements, such as rapes upon children, sodomy, the misuse of morphine, cocaine, etc. To great wealth, then, instead of being a preventive, is often a spur to new crimes. There are many, says Jolly, who have nothing and want nothing, and many who have too much and are always ambitious to possess more. And besides, just as in the war killing in mass, and at long range seems remote from the idea of homicide, so in great cities, to ruin at a distance by fraud or bankruptcy, an enormous number of people does not seem really a crime, even to many timid people. The born criminal finds, on the whole, more opportunities for crime in wealth than in poverty, but the case is still worse with the occasional criminal. It is only necessary to study the physiognomy of Peyhot, DZ, Tenlango, etc., to be convinced that these were not congenital criminals, and without politics would never have become criminals. Subchapter 64. The preponderance of poor criminals. But why, someone may object, are those convicted almost always poor? We see, for example, in the Statistica Penale for 1889, that 100 Italians inducted, of whom it was possible to know the economic condition, were divided as follows in their years given. The table is displayed on the page, with indigent, having only the necessities of life, fairly comfortable and well-to-do rich, compared with the years of 1887, 1888, and 1889. These figures agree with those published by Guillaume, Stevens, and Marrow. It shows us an enormous disproportion of crimes among the poor. But before we let ourselves be led away by these figures, which appear to be flatly contrary to our conclusions as to the evil effect of wealth, it is necessary to remember that the conviction of rich men is very rare, and that when they violate the laws, as Marrow very truly says, they are not put into prison so easily as the poor. The rich man has in his favour the influence of his fortune, his family, his social relations, and his intelligence. This is often enough to save him from prison, and always gives him able defenders. In the private asylums, which are used only by the rich, the morally insane are very numerous, though there are but few in the public asylums and the prisons, which means that wealth helps to clear up the pathology of the born criminal, while poverty obscures it. Further, in the contest between classes, the courts are used as a means of dominating the poor, who are already, a priori, convicted as such. The upper classes are accustomed to say, poor is a thief, and alas, what is worse, to turn the proverb around. Evers Collegiani says some of the delinquencies of the poor remain concealed, whether because the moral sense is deficient among them, and for this reason no information is laid, as in the case of sexual crimes, or because the offences take place under such conditions that they are not discovered, as in the case of field thefts. Does it always happen that all the crimes of the rich come to light? Is there an army corps set aside to discover the crimes of the rich, as there is for the offences committed in the fields or forests? And have there not been cases of parliamentary and political immunity, flagrant or secret, a kind of right of asylum, enormously extended to take in all delinquents having political power, ministers, deputies, great electors, journalists? A great poet has told us that rags allow crime to be seen at once through their rents, while gold conceals and defends it. To sum up, the economic factor has a great influence upon the crime. Not, however, that poverty is a principal cause of it, for excessive wealth or money too quickly acquired plays a large part as well, and poverty and wealth are frequently neutralized by the effect of race and climate. End of section 9.